From Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine in Cleveland, Ohio, this is the All Access Med School Admissions Podcast. Hello again, everybody. I'm your host, Christian Essman, and I'm the Senior Director of Admissions and Financial Aid here at the medical school. And it's great to be with you again. I've got an episode here for you. It's a little bit different than what I usually do. We're going to talk about tips for the application process for the 2022-2023 cycle. But before we do that, we've been doing some recent virtual fairs and received some emails from some prospective applicants. And some of the attendees at these fairs and some of these emails we received asked us if we're going to hold any general information sessions. And we usually don't, but we're going to do something that we haven't done in a long time, and that is host a webinar about our medical school, about our Case Western Reserve University Medical School. So, and guess what? You're invited. So this webinar is going to take place on Thursday, May 19th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And registration will be limited to, the max we can do is 1,000 registrants for the Zoom webinar. So there are links in the description, the notes for this show, that'll take you to that registration page where you can sign up. Please only sign up if you are pretty sure you can attend. I know sometimes stuff comes at the last minute, but if you sign up and you're kind of like, maybe I'll go, maybe I won't go, then you might be taking a spot away from somebody else who really can attend. So I hope you can be there, and we're going to talk about all things Case Western. So check it out on Thursday, May 19th. All right. So the AMCAS application for the 22-23 cycle opened up earlier this week at the time I'm recording this, and I thought you might find it helpful to get a few application tips while we're in the month of May and you're fine-tuning your application. And some of these application tips that I'm going to go over, you may have heard before. If you're a long-time listener of the show, then you probably heard some of these things sprinkled throughout different conversations with deans and directors that I was speaking with. So maybe, but if you're a new listener, these might be all new to you. So maybe for my older listeners, I'm bringing you the best ones and putting them all in one place. And for the new listeners, maybe this is an all new, set of tips and advice for you. So I'm going to kind of talk about each part of the application and give you a few things to think about, and some tips and maybe stuff to avoid. And it's not a comprehensive list, but I jotted down some notes, and some of these are just kind of off the cuff as I'm recording this. But I thought, again, hey, let's put this all in one place so that as you're getting your application ready this month, maybe you can keep these in mind. Okay, maybe save you some headaches down the road. So I guess first of all, we'll start with personal statements. And this seems to be the one thing that people want to know about the most. And for a lot of students, causes the greatest angst. And you've heard me talk about this with other podcast guests, with other deans and directors. And you heard us say, it's personal. That's why they call it the personal statement. And that's true. And I've read literally thousands of these. And so here are a few things I think you should avoid, or at least be mindful of, when you're crafting this essay. So one is try and not be overly dramatic in these essays, okay? This is not a novel. So sometimes being overly dramatic can kind of come across as a little disingenuous or unbelievable. So just be mindful of that you're not writing a novel. Something else that sometimes doesn't occur to people as they're writing it, but we see it sometimes when we're reading them, and that is a lack of different phrasing in the written part of the essay, meaning overusing primarily the letter I, using I at the beginning of every sentence or a number of sentences, like right in a row, and saying like, I believe, and I know, and I am. And when you sit back and look at it, you, as a reader, you're like, this needs to be rephrased. So take a second to maybe go through when you're finished with your essay and perhaps underline the letter I at the beginning of every sentence and see, boy, did I use this 5 times in a row? And if so, go back and maybe do some rephrasing of those sentences so it has a little bit different flow than just having I at the beginning of every sentence. Another thing to be mindful of is getting too tangential in your topics. Sometimes people go all over the map, and you're trying as a reader to try to stay with them and kind of follow where they're taking you on this personal statement. And then ultimately, if you're going all over the place, it lacks some focus, and then it makes it difficult to read. And one of the goals in this personal statement is to essentially, you want to make it easy to read and for the reader to understand. And remember, like I said a minute ago, I've read literally thousands of these, and so have other deans and directors in medical school. And you got to know, people are reading these day and night, in their offices and on their couches at night. And so sometimes on airplanes and sometimes in meetings and stuff like that. And so just know that like you want these to be easy to read. So don't get too tangential or have it lack too much focus. So maybe stick to 3 themes kind of in your personal statement. Try and not get all over the place. So in the same vein, then you don't want to reiterate all of your experiences and extracurricular activities into the personal statement. So you don't want to essentially have a narrative of your resume or a narrative of that experiences and activities section. Leave that experiences and activities section to highlight those different things. And can you refer to maybe the research that you did and a shadowing experience that you had and maybe a job or service project that you did that may also be referred to in the experiences and activity section? Absolutely. But you don't want to list everything in that personal statement that you've done and give us just, again, kind of a narrative resume or chronological timeline of all the things that you've done that have led you to this point where you're applying to medical school. Stick to about maybe 3 themes, just as a basic outline to get you started. So something else to keep in mind. Okay, spelling and grammatical errors, no. Okay, so make sure you're double, triple checking your spelling and grammatical errors. There are so many tools out there and resources to help you with this. You should not have any spelling or grammatical errors, and just know that these will jump out at us. And so if it does come across as having, you see misspelled words or some really bad grammar, it looks kind of sloppy then, all right? This should really be, your whole application should be your best work. And so really showing a professional kind of writing skill when it comes to this part. Don't use this opportunity to, try to crack jokes or come across as really clever or flippant. We've read some essays that are kind of, there's a little bit of humor in it and it's light humor, but just don't get overboard with that and turn it into a silly piece, okay? If you naturally can write that way and it comes across as lighthearted, I think that's okay. But it's sometimes you see people go a little bit overboard in the comedy area, and it's just not the right place to do that. We don't see that often, but every once in a while you do. And yeah, so, and kind of going in that vein too, everybody I know when they're putting together these personal statements, they want to try to have a hook in the first sentence. And be careful with that. And don't get into really gross kind of hooks. I mean, like describing some kind of nasty infection that you saw, or, you don't have to get too too hooky to bring us in. We're going to read these essays, but sometimes it's that first sentence or hook that can sometimes turn you off because it's like, oh goodness, like maybe it's overly dramatic, or maybe it just sounds gross, and you don't get the hook that you were hoping for. You're already kind of turning the reader off a little bit. So be careful with that. And I know I've read this in a lot of personal statement books on how to write the perfect personal statement. Like you have to hook them in. Not necessarily. If you're a good writer, you don't need to have that like special hook draw us in. And then kind of going off of that, please do not put profanity in your personal statement. Don't even come close to profanity. It does not cool. It doesn't make your statement pop when you use bad words, even if you're, like, say, quoting something a patient said or yelled at the ER staff or something. Don't even go down that road. I can't believe we even have to tell people that. Again, it doesn't draw our attention in the way that you think it might. Like, oh, they're going to keep reading this because they used a bad word. No, it really kind of turns people off, and it shows maybe potential bad judgment or lack of maturity. So do not put bad words in your personal statement. And then I guess my last tip would be, you don't have to use 50-cent words, meaning like writing with a thesaurus at your side, like trying to find another word that's like, 20 characters long that could have been said in a 5-character word. It's not your general daily, vernacular that you use, then don't drop it in your personal statement to try to make yourself sound more intelligent. Or it just, sometimes we've seen some personal statements that have tons of just really, just a level of vocabulary that makes you want to think like, boy, do they really use these words in their just general conversation? And listen, this doesn't disqualify you, I wouldn't say, from potentially getting an interview, but people might note like, hey, to the interviewer, do they use the type of vocabulary that they used in their personal statement and when you're interviewing them? So, some of these things they're not disqualifying, except for like using potential bad words and spelling and messy, grammatical errors in your personal statement can kind of come across as not a good presentation. But sometimes it's just like it kind of raises a little bit of maybe an orange flag, make a note to the interviewer kind of thing. Does the application match the applicant that you meet kind of thing? So again, there's just a few tips right there on the personal statement. Don't let this part of the application delay the submission of your application. It's going to take a few drafts to get it down and make sure it flows. Have a couple people read it to make sure, like, does it sound like you? Try to find that writing voice that you have. And if you've done it really well, sometimes the reader can feel like they're really hearing you speak to them. And not everybody can do that. But just know that we read these. They're read by screeners and evaluators, so your effort is not going in vain. So people are reading them. So I've had some applicants say, do you even read these? If you're not, I'm like, yeah, we read them. We read them. So trust us on that. All right, next chapter. The experiences and activities section, really important section in the application. So one of the most common questions I think admissions people receive is from pre-medical students is, how do I stand out? How can I stand out? And I get it. Like this year, there were over 53,000 applicants to medical school this year. That's a lot of applicants. And sometimes the profile of a pre-med student can look similar. So sometimes I've done some pre-med talks in front of a group of students, and I've said, all right, everybody raise your hand if you've shadowed. Whole room, hands go up. Everybody raise your hand if you've done research. Bunch of hands go up. How about if you've done volunteering or community service? Bunch of hands go up. And so you kind of start to see like this is the kind of basic profile of a pre-medical student. And that's okay. These are the things that pre-medical students are interested in, want to get involved in and demonstrate these interests in these areas. We totally get it. But then it comes back to, so if you're doing these things and they're all kind of similar, how can you differentiate yourself? And I get it. You want to try to differentiate yourself. So I really think it comes down to the way you write about your experiences in these descriptions that will help you make yourself stand out. And you understand that when you get to this activities section in AMCAS, you're given 15 fields and you get to put in there whatever you want to, medically and non-medically related things. And each of these sections, these fields, gives you 750 characters to describe what that experience was. In addition to that, you get to pick 3 of those experiences that are your most meaningful or most influential. And then when you choose those 3, AMCAS gives you an additional 1,350 characters to write more about it, why it was influential, why it was so meaningful to you. Again, these are like writing mini essays. And so you really need to craft these well. And this is where you can really start to tell people what you've taken away from these experiences, in addition to kind of the nuts and bolts, like what your role was and what your responsibilities were. What did you take away from them? The self-reflectiveness part of this application is really where you can kind of go deep and tell people kind of how you grew from it, and maybe what challenged you, what you're still working on. It's okay to show some vulnerabilities and say, yeah, I'm still working on public speaking. I try to get better at it in this role, and this has kind of helped me break me out of my shell a little bit, but I'm still working on, and that's okay. We don't expect that you're a perfect person. You're not going to be a perfect applicant. You don't have to aim for perfection in this. So really just, I think being authentic is important. So my daughter just went through the college application process, and in Common App, you're given 155 characters, I think, to write about your experiences, and you could just try to cram in as much as you can in 155 characters, and it's really hard. So, because I'm used to seeing 750 characters, and I'm like, gosh, kid's been in band for 4 years, and she gets 155 characters to write what she took away from being in marching band or, dance or something for over 10 years. That's really hard. So I was kind of looking over her shoulder, boy, what a challenge. So that's what's kind of nice about AMCAS is that they give you all this space to write about your experiences. So with regards to the most meaningful, I've had some applicants ask me, is there some kind of game to picking the most meaningful? Like, are you guys looking for something in particular in the most meaningful? I wouldn't necessarily say there's a game to it. On one hand, if you're applying as an MD, PhD candidate and you don't pick research as one of your most meaningful, I think that might raise a little bit of a flag there, right? And maybe don't pick 3 of the same things as your most meaningful. Like, say you don't pick 3 shadowing experiences as your most meaningful or 3 research projects as your most meaningful. Maybe have a little bit of variety so that you can then use those extra characters, those 1,350 characters to kind of highlight what those things meant to you in different ways and kind of be able to draw out more of your personality and your growth and those kind of things. So is there a game? Yes. No, sometimes yes. So it just think of it that way. Use that as an opportunity to develop a way to talk more about yourself in different ways. And don't forget, in the activities and experiences section, don't leave out non-medically related activities. Things like work history. Like, just because you work at a restaurant or you're not working at a hospital, don't leave that out. If you had to have a work study position when you're an undergrad, don't leave that stuff out, because you've heard me say this before, it helps us connect the dots. And so that's really important to us to see that if you have had to work, leave that in there. Or, I've had some students say, I did some things that were non-medically related, some campus activities or volunteering in the community or with my church. Did you want to see that? Like, absolutely. Yes, these 15 fields are yours, and they just aren't geared towards medically related topics, which takes me to hobbies and interests. If you can work in one of those fields, your hobbies and interests, I recommend you do that. It shows us, one, that you have things that you like to do outside of medically related activities, and that maybe this is where you find your life balance. It's exercising or playing an instrument or, collecting things, all kinds of different hobbies and interests out there. You're outdoorsy, you like to, sail or whatever it is. Put those things out there because, again, it also shows us another dimension of you as an applicant. So when we're talking about differentiating yourself, sometimes it's a hobby or interest, something very special that you do that just you alone are interested in. So we've seen all kinds of really cool or interesting hobbies and interests that sometimes make you remember that applicant a little bit more, and they sound a little more interesting. So if you can work those in there, talk about that. One thing to keep in mind in these experiences section that we've seen, I feel like we've been talking about it more, say, in our admissions committee meetings over the last couple of years. One part of each of these sections in the experiences and activities section is you have to estimate the number of hours you were involved in them. And we've seen some applicants really kind of what it seems like overestimating the number of hours they were participating in an activity, like putting in thousands and thousands of hours. And then when you line them up with when they were doing them, you realize there's no way mathematically that the student could have been doing all these activities for thousands and thousands of hours at the same time. There's just not enough hours in that time frame to have done this. So it looks a little fishy, if you will, so maybe the applicant just didn't pay as much attention to that, didn't think that really matters, but it does matter. So let's say though you have go back to one of those hobbies that maybe you've done since you were 10 years old. A lot of times we'll see students like, who's the reference for this? Like they'll list themselves as the reference. And how many hours have you done this? And it's 9,999 hours because you've been doing it since you were 10 years old. I get that. The difference is say it's a research project that you've been working on for the last year and somebody writes that they've been doing it for 12,000 hours. And when they're also doing other activities, that's where it becomes a little bit where the math doesn't add up sometimes. So the point is, do your best to estimate the number of hours that you were involved in those activities, and don't just kind of blow it off like, they really don't care. Let's throw down 7,000 hours, and maybe for the next one we'll put 5,000 hours, and because it certainly felt like 5,000 hours, then the math isn't going to add up, and then people are going to scratch their heads and you're like, let's look at this a little closer. What if you start to run? So you get 15 fields here. What if you start to feel like you're running out of room? Like you're like, I have 17 things I want to share with them, but I'm running out of room. It's okay to combine some experiences together if you need more room. So for example, maybe you have a handful of shadowing experiences. I've certainly seen some applicants group together their shadowing experiences into one experience and kind of lay out the almost like bullet point the different physicians they shadowed and kind of wrap it up with I shadowed for 200 hours with these 5 or 6 physicians over the course of this time period, and I took away, this is what they took away from it. And so some students, they need to kind of consolidate some things, and it's okay to do that. Again, for instance, I've seen this too with honors and awards and scholarships. Let's say you receive Dean's List and some department awards and maybe a scholarship because you did so well in that major kind of thing. And so I've seen students kind of group honors, awards, and scholarships together and then, kind of detail out what that meant. And, I don't think you have to go in great detail about what Dean's Lists mean. I think most admissions people recognize and understand what the dean's list mean. So you don't have to go in a ton of detail there, but if that could be another place where you could consolidate and save yourself some room and give yourself some space for some other activities that you want to share. So again, grammar and spelling, very, very important in this section too. So again, I'm harping on this. These are like mini essays. So you really need to sit down and spend some time with them and make sure these are grammatically and spelling is all very correct. So something else to take a close look at. How about letters of recommendation here real quick? Some places where I've seen students kind of get delayed with letters of rec. Now, listen, I know every med school has a different set of requirements for letters of recommendation. So maybe you make a spreadsheet to kind of make sure that you're hitting everybody's requirements for letters of rec. And in AMCAS, you can indicate which letters you want sent to which school, so you make sure that you are meeting their expectations and requirements for letters of recommendation. But one thing I've seen applicants kind of get hung up on or delays their application is the letter writer doesn't put their letter on letterhead. It's just they wrote it like on a Word doc or a Google doc, and they sent it in. And then some med schools push back to the applicant and say, hey, we know you can't see these letters because you've usually waived your right to confidentiality to see them, so you don't get to see what the letter writer said, but your letter writer needs to put it on letterhead. So I guess one thing to say to your letter writers before they write the letter, say, hey, I really appreciate you're doing this for me. Can you do me a big favor and make sure you put it on letterhead, whether from your university or from your employment, that it's on official letterhead, and sign it. I know that some med schools have pushed back because it hasn't been signed or electronically signed. So just a couple little things right there that might save you some headaches of getting some pushback in the middle of the process when you're like, oh, I thought I was all set. Now I got to go track down this letter writer, and they're on vacation, and you're kind of stressed out about that. So try to nip that ahead of time so that you save yourself a headache. And then you want to monitor the submission. So if you're getting a ton of letters sent, which some schools say, like here at Case Western, we say 3 to 5 letters. It's kind of our max, and some students want to submit to some schools like 7, 8, 9 letters. Just know that 9th letter that you said is coming could delay the submission of your application, because you said 9 letters are coming and that 9th one is still hanging out there. That med school may not see your application until that 9th one arrives. So be mindful of how many letters you want to have out there being sent to schools. And truth be told, it's not like that 6th letter is going to tip the scales. I mean, generally speaking, these letters are glowing. They say great things about you. It's not like that 6th or 7th letter of that 7th person who's saying wonderful things about you is like, wow, there's 7 people that think great things about them. Let's bring them in for an interview. These are nice letters that give us background and information and context and beyond what we're reading in the application. But so you really got to monitor the submission of those applications, or of those letters from your letter writer. And I believe you can do that through AMCAS, their letter service. So something to keep in mind. All right, next little chapter here, transcripts. As a part of the application process, you have to have all your official transcripts from any college courses you've ever taken sent to AMCAS. And they'll take either a hard copy or you can submit it, have it transmitted electronically. So this is one place where a delay can come into play, is if you don't request these from your registrar's office and in a timely manner. And also, if you owe fees to that college, sometimes the colleges will put a hold on your transcripts until the bill's paid. So again, another place where a speed bump can come in your way that you didn't expect. And you say, hey, I need my transcript sent to AMCAS in Washington, D.C. And they say, oh, you owe us, X amount of dollars from some fee that you didn't pay. You're like, oh, man. So now you got to go through that process that might delay things a little bit. So be mindful of that. So speaking of transcripts, have an official copy. Maybe you can access it through like some portal on your end from your university. You have to data entry in all of your courses into AMCAS. All right. So have your transcripts, any college course you've ever taken, have those transcripts handy by you, and then you have to enter in all the courses that you've ever taken. And so then AMCAS calculates a GPA that ultimately might be slightly different than what your college transcript says. Okay? So if you want to go through the exercise of calculating your AMCAS GPA but before you submit, you can do that by using an AMCAS conversion document. And I'm putting a link in the show description so you can see how you do that. You'll also see in that document the academic history chart that we as medical schools see on our end, the way AMCAS breaks down your GPA across all 4 years, and if you had post-bac work, and then your overall GPA, and then your graduate GPA. And you'll see how that's all that table is visualized by med schools. And they break it down in columns by BCPM, biology, chemistry, physics, mathematics, AO for all others, and then cumulatively. And then on rows, we see freshman, sophomore, junior year, senior year, those kind of things. So I think that's sometimes students like to see that because then you can see what we see. And sometimes students are surprised, especially those who've done graduate work, to see that your graduate work is separated out from your undergraduate. There's not an overall combined GPA for an applicant of undergrad and graduate, and here's this overall GPA. It doesn't work that way. There's undergraduate GPA, and then the line below that is graduate GPA. So there's not an overall GPA for every applicant. So something to keep in mind, check out that document. And again, then you get to see kind of what we'll see on our end. And then we look for trends, and somebody came into college and just wasn't doing well their freshman year for whatever reason. And we want to see, hey, did they start to kind of really spike up? They lock things in sophomore, junior, senior year, and that trend increases. So we look for trends like that. And so that's what we see. Let's see here. How about secondary applications? So when schools get verified AMCAS applications, we'll talk about that right at the end here. A lot of med schools will send out their secondaries to everybody with a verified application. There are a handful of schools that do some pre-screening to send out secondaries, but most med schools send out their secondary application invitations to everybody with a verified application. So, but if you want to find out if that school screens, or if you have to have some special like in-state residency kind of stuff, if you've been listening to some of my episodes, there's some state schools that require that you have some link to that state before they send you a secondary. They're trying to save you some time and money, actually. Check out those, look closely at their details. You can find that stuff a lot of times in the MSAR, the Medical School Admissions Requirements Guide. They'll have that laid out there, and obviously on their websites. But when you get these secondary invitations, you want to turn these secondary applications around in a timely manner. And what I mean by that is maybe a few weeks, 3 weeks after receiving it. Every application, whether it's the primary AMCAS application or the secondary application for these schools, will have deadlines. We have to put an endpoint out there to people. And so, like, for instance, here at Case Western, our AMCAS deadline is November 1st, and our secondary deadline, I think this coming year, is going to be December 1st. So we got to put an endpoint out there. If you get the secondary in August, don't wait until November 30th to submit it. It's to your advantage to get these things turned around in a relatively short amount of time, because we want to extend interview invitations. And in fact, that we all have more interview slots in the summertime than we do later in the application cycle. So it's to your advantage to not wait until those deadlines to submit those things. And we can't preach this enough, because we have very few and limited interview spots when we get to December, and we're probably booking into January or sometimes February, or some schools go into March. Then we have far more interview spots back in the summertime. So that's why you'll hear us say, you want to apply early. And we'll get to that when I wrap up here in just a minute. So another thing about secondary applications, they're all very school specific. Some of them have school-specific essays, and some of them, the essay prompts might seem similar from one school to another. try and not be tempted to copy from one essay and paste it into another. It's like, this one's pretty close to that one. I'm just going to lift this and stick it over there. And sometimes it doesn't answer the question thoroughly. And I've seen this in our own applications where you're reading the essay, it's like, either they misread the prompt or they thought like, well, this is pretty close to Case Westerns. Let's just copy this one here that I worked on and drop it in there and I'm done with that. And then it just doesn't seem to answer the question and you're kind of left, wondering, well, did they not put the time in here or did they not read the prompt correctly? So try to avoid that, doing that. That could be a shortcut that could come back to bite you. You might find med schools are offering a COVID essay, like hey, please tell us about any disruptions that you had during the COVID years. We had things that were canceled or delayed and that kind of stuff. So take that as an opportunity. Or, were you impacted? Was your family impacted by COVID financially, medically? And I think that also adds some context to what you've gone through over these last few years. It really hasn't been easy, right? And so don't miss that opportunity to share any disruptions that you may have had during those years. What about optional essays? There's some med schools, and Case included, we have some optional essays. And like, for instance, one that we have is, here's a field, like if there's anything that hasn't been captured in your application anywhere else, feel free to share that with us. And I know some other med schools have those kind of things too. And that is really an opportunity. It's optional, but if you feel there's something that you want to expand on that you didn't have enough room in another part of the application, or maybe you submitted your AMCAS application in early June, but you're getting the secondary at the end of July, and you're like, oh my gosh, something's changed since then. Here's your opportunity to use that spot to kind of say, since I submitted my application in June, I'm going to give you this update. This is also a place where you might, if you want to, share with them why you're interested in that school. Like, how did it get on your radar? Like, how was it that you came about, checking them off on AMCAS as a school to apply to? Or I've seen some students write about not only what interested them about their medical school, like ours, for instance, but also maybe something about the city, that you did a little bit of research about that city and what maybe something that's attracted to you, or maybe some programs in the area that are not affiliated with the medical school, or they are affiliated with the university that you were kind of drawn to. So sometimes that can show, a little bit of extra effort and that you did some homework, that you took a lot of thought into the schools that you selected and why. And again, going back to how do you differentiate yourself? Maybe this is a place that allows you to kind of differentiate yourself. Like, wow, I've really done my homework on this school and I want to show you that. So getting back to what makes you stand out, it's these little things like this that sometimes can help you kind of maybe pop sometimes. All right, lastly, the submission for this year of AMCAS will begin on May 31st. Now, just because the submission button becomes available on May 31st doesn't mean you have to stay up until 12:01 a.m. on May 31st or whenever that button becomes available on that day to click submit. You can if you think you're ready, but here's how the process works. Just because you click submit doesn't mean it comes to the med schools right away. It doesn't just blast out to those, 13 schools you applied to. The process is it goes to AMCAS. And remember we said you have to have your transcripts sent to AMCAS? Well, there's this verification process that then takes place. So after you have all of your official transcripts sent to AMCAS and they've been received, they have specially trained staff that complete a line-by-line comparison of the information you entered in the application and to the information that's on the official transcript. So for instance, they go through each course. This is what the stuff they verify. They verify the academic year and term that you took the course name. They verify the grade that you received. They verify the semester hours, the course classification. And then they do additional checks on things that like repeated coursework. Was it military coursework? Or they also verify that if you've had a previous matriculation to any med school. So this can take some time, but that's why you have to be really careful when you're doing that data entry on your end that it matches your official transcripts, because somebody's going to go through it, like I said, line by line, and make sure that you wrote down you got an A in organic chemistry. The official transcript says you got an A in organic chemistry. You said that you got an A in molecular genetics. Your transcript says you got an A in molecular genetics. And if there is, they don't match, they're going to push it back to you and say, hey, you put down you got an A, transcript says something else. You got to fix this. And then we're going to go back through the process again. So that can take some time. It can take a few weeks for verification. Last year they were pretty fast though, but I'm not going to give you weeks and stuff because I don't exactly know how this is going to go this year. Oftentimes there's a tsunami of applications that kind of comes. But so here's the thing. So even if you're verified, you submit at 12:01 on May 31st. Again, it doesn't go to the medical schools. We don't get it right away. And you get verified in 2 weeks. It's going to sit in a database for the rest of the month. And then at the end of June, we get our first download. So for the whole month of June, it might be just kind of sitting there. And then at the end of June, the medical schools then get their first download of verified applications. And then we get daily downloads of verified applications. So my point is, if you need a little bit of time and you're still crafting these essays and you're still working on your experiences and you're still kind of working away at stuff, it's okay if you're working on this into June. I just don't want you waiting until end of July, beginning of August to be submitting your application to AMCAS. Into September sometimes can start to get kind of late. So that's why I'm telling you this stuff now and how the process works. So you don't get a gold star if you submit it right away at 12:01. If you need a little bit of time, you're just kind of making sure that your I's are dotted and T's are crossed, and it's June 10th, I think you're going to be okay. But just don't wait too long on that. So after all that coursework is verified, then AMCAS calculates the AMCAS GPA, like I told you about earlier. And so this process that they do, it really helps ensure that the academic performance can be evaluated fairly by medical schools, and regardless of like the variations in institutions' grading and credits and calendar systems, right? So there are so many different, like there's trimesters and semesters, and some schools do pluses and minuses, and some schools don't. So this allows, AMCAS has this calculated GPA. So again, your GPA may look different than your AMCAS GPA. So something to think about. All right. I think I hit all the highlights that I wanted to share with you. I think that's all the big ones I wanted to share with you today. So hopefully you find this helpful. And hopefully it kind of maybe helps you fine tune your application a little bit differently than maybe what you you kind of plan to. Maybe this will help kind of enhance it a little bit, is my hope. And so hopefully we see you on May 19th for our general information session about all things Case Western. We're going to try that out. Love to see you there. And with that, I think we'll see you next time. Let me know if you have any questions. You can hit me at allaccess@case.edu. Take care.